about NES programming, but today we have Derek Andrews from Gradual Games.
Hello.
And he has graciously agreed to join this week. Funny thing, though, is that simultaneously there was also an episode of the NES Assembly Line released this week where he was also featured. So this is the week of Gradual Games. But thanks for coming on the stream, man. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Glad to be here.
So why don't you start by introducing yourself for the millionth time, and let the people watching who don't know who you are.
Okay. Well, my name's Derek Andrews, and I've been making NES games, working on NES games now since about 2008. And that those 10 years have been spent making 3 games of roughly the scope of what you remember from the 80s and 90s, platformers and well, 2 platformers now and 1 adventure game. Working at a relatively slow pace. So a game that might have taken Capcom 1.5 to 2 years to make takes me about 3.5 or 4, and even at that length, I still haven't made something quite as large as what they've made.
Right, but with the caveat that you're doing it yourself, with your wife's help as your artist. Yep. One of the games being Legends of Owlia. Let me get that, which is an awesome game. So that was the game that was featured on NES Assembly Line this week, this last episode. So if you haven't played it, you should grab the ROM from Derek's website, and you should buy it if you can, because it's awesome and it's fun to play on real hardware. So part of the reason I'm doing these streams is to kind of get a sense of some of the more well-known people in the scene, where they got their start and why they even came to NES programming. So what were you doing before you started NES programming, NES homebrew? Like, how old were you, and what was the appeal of homebrew versus any sort of other? Well, I should say NES homebrew versus other homebrew, because now it sounds like you've kind of gotten mixed up in Atari homebrew a little bit, and some other game development shenanigans.
Mm-hmm. So the way I got into NES development was there were a lot of factors that went into it, and like right before I decided to delve into it, I was kind of in a very chaotic state where I knew I wanted to do some kind of hobby programming, probably game related, after I graduated college, but I didn't quite know exactly what I wanted to do at first. And so I spent a couple of years kind of flailing around and attempting things, and interacting with a coworker of mine named Bill at the time, who was really into game development, and kind of getting some ideas from him of what to try. And I had a couple of germinal game ideas that eventually became NES games, but I was attempting to make Nomolos in XNA with C# or very early on. I really had no idea what I was doing and didn't get very far. And then I also attempted to do the Legends of Owlia in RPG Maker XP and didn't get very far with that either. But way further back than that, that time period I was just describing was around 2007 or so. But way before that, before college, I had learned programming on DOS using QBasic and a little bit of Turbo C and DJGPP and a little bit of DOS assembly language. And I had made a few small things on that old DOS platform, and through college and beyond, I sort of maintained a nostalgia for returning to the simplicity of DOS or something similar. And I remember a conversation with this coworker I mentioned, Bill, from 2007, where I told him that I was really nostalgic for QBasic and working in an older environment. And at that point, he he pointed me to NES Dev, and NES was one of my favorite consoles growing up, and I thought, well, I've got a little bit of a background in assembly language on DOS, maybe I can learn 6502 for the NES. And it wasn't too long after that I discovered the NES 101 tutorial, which was shared in a thread by Roth. And that kind of got me started. And in conjunction with discovering Civic at the time was making Battle Kid, and I saw that he was releasing his game on a real cartridge and using Retro USB's Power Pack. So I obtained a Power Pack and fiddled with the NES 101 tutorial and got a tiny program running on my actual NES, and like that it was such a fun time to see it run, see my own code running on the NES, and it just kind of went from there. And so that chaotic state that I had previously been in, where I really didn't know what I was working on, became very solidified at that point. I just kind of kept studying the NES and eventually began the Nomolos project.
And that is such a cool experience, right? To get your code actually running on a real NES. It's funny, you had mentioned you looked at XNA, which is I shared with you that project that I built in that 3D game that I was working on, and that was actually built in XNA. And
that was cool.
Oh, thanks. And one of the things that was nice about XNA was that it was relatively straightforward, but for me, I think the thing that really made me want to continue with it was, ironically, the fact that you could run it on the Xbox 360 at the time. Was that something that you had considered at all, or was that, or were you just using it because it was kind of a pre-built API similar to like Allegro or those existing sort of older DOS graphics libraries?
Yeah, I think I originally started using it because it seemed like that was what indie game developers at the time were using. Like, Bill, I think, had mentioned it to me, and I didn't have an Xbox, so I was mainly interested in trying to make something work on the PC at the time. But I think throughout all of that, I really had this very strong nostalgia for going back to something like DOS. And I recall in college, prior to meeting that coworker Bill, speaking to a couple of classmates about game development, and at the time I was kind of peeking at this video game console by have you heard of Andrei Lamothe, the author?
Oh yeah, of course.
Yeah, so he had a company where he made like these very simple sort of hobbyist video game systems that would be sort of an 8-bit AVR based game console. And I didn't actually pick one up, but I was thinking about getting one because I thought this would be really similar to programming in DOS, because it would just be like writing some simple C code and writing to a frame buffer and have very simple hardware. And I think for ever since being a teenager, I really wanted to be in a simple environment. I think that thread never really changed. And so when I was tinkering in things like XNA and RPG Maker XP, I didn't have that feeling. I wanted to have that feeling of working in a simple computer environment without APIs in the way.
No, I know exactly what you mean. So the for those people who don't know, Andrei Lamothe, he wrote a few, I would say they were really important books during the 90s and so you've got them. You've got two of several of the books. He wrote a book that's really funny. So he wrote a book called Teach Yourself Game Programming in 21 Days, which I still have. And that was the book that taught me how to do C programming for games on DOS. And then he wrote the game, what is it? The tricks of the
Tricks of the Windows Game Programming Gurus.
Right, yeah. And then he also wrote the other one, the 3D one, which he teaches you how to write a software 3D rasterizer.
Yep, that's this one.
Yeah. And then the book that sort of corresponded to the console that you're talking about was, I think it was like Teach Yourself How to Make Your Own Game Console or something like that, right?
Yeah, I never picked that one up. I was more interested in just buying one of those consoles so that I could write software for it.
Yeah, wow, that's interesting. So like you took a very similar path to to what I did. I wonder how many people read those books and sort of went down that same line because of Andre.
Well, the funny thing about Enter the Moth is that I didn't really delve very far into his books. I don't have Tricks of the Windows Game Programming Gurus anymore, but I did, and I had done a small amount of C++ and DirectX as a teenager, but I was very undisciplined, and I just couldn't stand all of the boilerplate that had to be in place for a DirectX game to run.
Oh yeah.
And I found it very frustrating because at the time, I think coming from QBasic, where I was like a master of QBasic, I knew the entire QBasic API, and I felt like I knew everything in that environment. I really liked that feeling. Coming to DirectX and C++, I thought I need to be the same way with C++. I need to know everything. I need to know all the DirectX API. I need to know the Windows API, and I need to know all of C++. And so when I was reading that book, I thought I have to memorize all this boilerplate. And I think, I just got really frustrated with how complex and messy and noisy the whole thing was, and I quit. I didn't actually get through the book.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. I mean, there is something to be said about the simplicity of the NES. It's kind of funny because people look at it and they go, "Oh my God, it's so complicated. It's so hard," but it's really not. I mean, for anybody on here who hasn't tried to do DirectX, DirectX is built on Microsoft's COM, what is it? Common Object Model or component, something like that. And it has just so much garbage around just getting the objects that you need to start the process of creating a window that you can actually display something on. Like, 100 lines of code or so. That's all basically just repetitive code that could have been hidden away somewhere, just to get a window that you can actually put something onto, right? Whereas, I mean, the NES, it looks complicated, but in 100 lines of code, you can do a lot of stuff.
Yeah, you can get a basic template going and draw a sprite on the screen with almost nothing.
Yeah. So it's that's interesting, and so the Kevin and Beau were talking about in the previous discussions about how they sort of also got very excited about the fact that they could get something onto the screen and have it move around, and then it was actually something that was easy to do, and it was or relatively easy to do, and on a platform that they loved. It's interesting that everybody seems to be coming back to the NES for specifically that reason, and I love the comments that people make. Like, if you had told the 5-year-old me that I was going to write something for the NES, my head would have exploded. And I think there's still some of that feeling coming to NES programming even now at 37.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that when I was little, I think I very much wanted to be a game developer eventually. I remember seeing ads for DigiPen and Nintendo Power, and at the time, I think it was it showed people working on Super Nintendo games, and so at the time I thought, okay, Nintendo's done now. They're not going to make any new consoles. It's going to be Super Nintendo for the next 20 years. So surely I'll be able to go to college and get a job programming Super Nintendo games.
Did you send away for their booklet
for DigiPen? I might have. I can't remember. I probably didn't.
It was kind of funny because there was a red and a blue binder, and it had like a wire spiral binder binding on it. And I know because I saw the same thing, and I sent away for it and showed my parents. I'm like, hey, this is a real college, and it has links with Nintendo, and they teach you how to program. And they were like, go ahead.
I remember when I was a kid just being so curious about how the games worked, and I would sit and imagine how it might work. like with very little programming knowledge. Like I remember wondering about it before I even learned any programming, just kind of like wondering how different pieces of it worked and wondering how I played music and everything, just being very curious about it. And I remember asking my dad, who's is a mathematician and knows some about computer programming, asked him like, how do people make video games? And he said, I think they probably use assembly language or something. So I remember him telling me this, and I was like a kid, and just like imagining like what would go into it. But it seemed like this completely untouchable thing that would never, I would never be able to find out really what the truth was about how games are made for these systems that I played. And I thought they're made in a far off land of Japan by geniuses that just know how to do this stuff. And
right.
so like now being 35 and having made 3 NES games, and then thinking back to that kid that I was, just wondering like if I could literally go back in time and talk to my younger self and tell him that he's gonna make real NES games, I'm certain he would lose his mind.
Yeah.
What? What? I'm gonna make Nintendo games?
Yeah, it's an awesome thing, and you've made 2 released and 1 soon to be released, I think. Awesome games. I've been able to play Trophy, and I can definitively say that I think it's awesome. Although we'll get to you have some concerns about that, and we'll talk about that, because it's a funny thing with some of the things happening in the homebrew community. Some of the challenges of new people coming in and not really understanding the difference between homebrew and ROM hacks and NES Maker and that sort of thing. Okay. Oh, go ahead.
Can I interject one thing that I thought would be fun?
Sure.
We were talking about Andrew Lamothe a few minutes ago, and there's an actually really funny personal connection I have to him via someone else. He had an apprentice named Alex Veronese, and this apprentice, Alex Veronese, used to be in the QBasic RPG scene roughly 20 years ago. And I had befriended this guy long before I even knew about Andrew Lamothe. And he actually became a bit of an enemy at the time, because as a very immature teenager who wanted to be seen as amazing without any work at all, I was, had difficulty with encountering other programmers that may, know more than me, and it was tough for me at the time. But what made it worse was this guy, Alex Veronese, who, whenever I wanted to learn something from him, because it seemed like he knew so much, he wouldn't tell me. Like, he wouldn't share any code. He wouldn't try to help me. He would just tell me that I was doing things wrong. So it became this very horrible ego battle. And he actually kind of ruined programming for me back then. And it actually kicked off a long hiatus of programming. Like, I went to college for programming anyway, but he kind of ruined the fun of it for me. So it was really only after college that I was able to sort of, repair the wounds of time and get back on track. But it's just funny. He was the apprentice of Andrew Lamothe later. Like,
that is an interesting side connection, but it also leads into, so I mean, you are professionally a programmer by day, a professional programmer by night, NES homebrew master, but
I don't know about master. I think I'd reserve that word for Tevils.
Okay. What's below master but still really high?
I don't know. Stubborn and hardworking.
Okay, fair enough. But so then, what made you actually decide you were going to do computer science in college after it kind of got ruined for you?
Just extreme pragmatism. I knew that it was a lucrative field to go into, and so just despite that I had a very bad taste in my mouth about programming at the time, I thought to myself, this is what I should do. And I was getting into music at the time, and at some point in college I considered switching, but my piano teacher discouraged that heavily, perhaps because he didn't see enough performance talent to switch.
Well, okay. I mean, there's more to music than just performance, right? Like, I think the performance road and I don't know that this is 100% true, but I've always kind of heard or felt like the performance road is sort of reserved for the people who have been playing and performing,
Since they're six.
well, yeah, or younger, right? Like, I remember talking to someone about, because I've told you I play piano and I took lessons when I was 5 and kind of continued on till I was about 16. And I remember my mom really wanted me to play, and so that's why I took lessons. And she commented to someone who sort of knew what it involved, like, oh, well, he could be a professional pianist. And the person responded, well, he's too old already if that's the job that he wants. And I was, like 12.
Yeah, it's crazy what goes into molding kids into conservatory material. It's just it's mind blowing. And like I've continued to pursue playing piano, but it's I finally realized just how hard it really is to play pieces like really 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 well and without mistakes and expressively and so forth, because I'm playing, like, I'm still playing stuff like Clementi sonatinas, which are taught to, like, 4-year-old Asian kids, and they play them perfectly. But I'm learning them now, and I think it's fun. I'm 35, and I'm having trouble getting those little pieces to be perfect. So it's really really hard to perform keyboard music.
Well, yeah, and I mean, I don't know what your schedule is like, but are you practicing daily, or are you practicing just whenever you find time?
Just whenever I find time, which is usually a little bit daily, but not super intensely. Like,
Yeah, and
play at
that's
a
the
high
thing.
level, you have to play for like 4-6 hours a day.
Yeah, well, and that's what I was going to say. I mean, even so, as a kid, you have the advantage of, if that's what you want to do, you can do it, right? Like, you can focus on doing that all day. I also spoke with someone who was a concert pianist, because I was at a music shop playing a piano, and she's like, "Oh, you're very good. What conservatory did you go to?" I'm like, "I didn't." I said, "I just couldn't find myself. The idea of practicing 3 to 4 hours every day didn't really appeal to me." And she goes, "It's more like 7 to 8, but you still play really well." And I kind of felt it was like a backhanded compliment, I guess. But
It's nice that it's possible to play a reasonable amount of intermediate stuff without having to practice that much and still enjoy it, not really play it even anything close to what a professional does, but well enough to really enjoy yourself. I'm glad that it's possible.
well, yeah.
Homebrew mentioned in the chat he wants to see the clavichord.
Oh, sure.
There it is.
You want to play a couple notes on it?
Oh, I was going to show you the instrument.
Oh, okay. Go for it.
Actually, yeah, I'll bring this over to it so you can see it better. Let's see, can you see the keyboard? There it is. Yeah, so it's a really neat instrument because it's the predecessor to a piano, but it's very simple. Like, piano has like a bazillion little levers whenever you hit a key to throw the hammer, but on a clavichord it's just one lever. It's like a seesaw. You hit a key and a little piece of metal rises up and touches the string and makes a sound. And the cool thing about that is you can actually do a vibrato with it. So yeah, that's my clavichord. Kind of a tangent from the purpose of the discussion, but
no, it's all relevant, because you mentioned that you were interested in music in college, and that your teacher maybe thought it wasn't the best approach, but to your career. But you are, I would say, a pretty accomplished composer and musician. So I think it's totally relevant.
Thanks. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and as was discussed, you wrote the music for Owlia, and the music in Trophy, man, is so good. I know uh,
Thanks.
Beau and Beau in particular was gushing about it, but I don't think it's hyperbole. So, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying thanks.
Hmm.
Kind words.
They're all true. They're all true. So you went to school for programming, despite sort of being turned off to it, because you knew it was going to be at least a viable career. You were kind of steered in that direction. You got a job programming, and then you came back to NES programming as sort of a hobby, which you then sort of turned into these games, or not sort of, you definitely turned into these games through exploring different routes, like we talked about. What is your process for designing the games? I mean, I know that you talked about Elia was a long-term project, the idea and the genesis of the idea from childhood, but you know, the actual there's a big difference between having an idea and then making a game. Lots of people have ideas and then they never materialize into anything.
Yeah, there's a rather vast chasm between what one imagines and what actually winds up shaking out when you begin executing on those ideas. I've found, and that's true. It seems to be true even if you're choosing to do something that's relatively derivative. And that's what I chose to do when I made Nomolos. I didn't want to make anything remotely original. I just wanted to make a good platformer. Was basically my goal, and I didn't have any desire in mind to impress anyone or to try to include tons and tons of features. I just wanted to make a good platformer, and so I think the first decision I made was to reduce the number of features as far as I possibly could, and that was inspired by my first job, where the software we were making in that first job was it was a disaster on many levels, because I think they hired a bunch of kids right out of college who didn't have any experience making large pieces of software, and they wanted like everything at the kitchen sink and threw things in. They wanted things done really fast, and so it was a disaster. And so with that as sort of an example and recent experience, I thought, okay, if I put in dozens of features to my game, it's going to be crap because I don't have enough experience to know what to do with all that complexity right off the bat. So I'm going to make it as bare bones simple as possible. I'm just going to have one character, and we're going to scroll in one direction, which I later changed, but I was just to roll in one direction and have one weapon. And I later compromised with myself and allowed 3 weapons and two-way scrolling. But it turned out that restriction of features was helpful for finishing my first project. Especially one of the earliest decisions I made was to have Nomolos only move 2 pixels at a time horizontally. He only had variable speed vertically, and believe it or not, that one decision made a ton of things in programming of the character way simpler than if you allow sub-pixel movement horizontally as well as vertically, which I did in Trophy. It's dramatically harder to get Trophy's state machine working. But that was probably much too technical of an answer to your question, which is more about designing the game.
Well, I mean, I think it's relevant, and I know that these talks have been criticized in the past as being a little bit too technical, but I mean, I sit here and program an assembly for 2 hours or 3 hours sometimes. I'm not sure how we could have these discussions and not get down to that kind of nitty-gritty. So whatever level that you want is fine.
Okay, well, I was going to go back up to thinking about the game design decisions, and I'd say that my first several games, I really took a very derivative approach. I can't say if I was even really that interested in the details of game design. Like I wasn't researching game design. I didn't watch any YouTube channels about it. I didn't read about it. I just wanted to imitate some games that I knew from my childhood, from the NES. And so one interesting fact about that, when I presented Nomolos to my friend Dan, he found that the gameplay was broken almost immediately, because you could take the sword and you could keep pressing the B button so fast that the hitbox remained alive constantly, and he could just charge through a level, plow through the enemies, and never get hit. And from Dan's feedback, he said what you should do is have the hitbox turn off and have a little bit of a pause between attacks. And so from a very good video game player, I learned a little tidbit about proper game design for a platformer. And I just thought it was interesting, because that was the first experience I had programming a game where I was forced to think about the actual impact something had on a player. Like before that, I was just like, making things work and imitating what I knew a platformer to be, and I made him jump, he could run around a level, he could hit things, but it was actually pretty broken gameplay-wise till a good player looked at it and told me what was wrong.
Yeah, and that's where playtesting is so critical, and so many people who are actually in the, I would say, mainstream game development. I didn't want to say professional game development, because you are professionally making games. I mean, people are paying you for your games. That makes it sort of by definition, even if it's not full time.
Yeah, I suppose. I tend to think of professional as being having the potential to quit your day job.
Well, I mean, there are professional musicians who only play part-time because they don't make enough money being musicians to, they're still professional, they're still good. Maybe not to the level they'd like, but anyway, so going back to what you said, so it's interesting how playtesting can bring out flaws in the design that you wouldn't otherwise see. I mean, even just having something that is playable, right? Because you hear so many people talking about, oh, wouldn't it be awesome to have a game that, I think a good example is Fallout 76 just came out, and there are no NPCs. All of the people that you interact with are real players. And that's one of the biggest complaints that people playing the game have, is that there's like nothing in the game, right? There just aren't enough people. I mean, there are a lot of other complaints, but in your mind, like, I could see someone being like, this will be amazing, this is going to be the best thing. But like in practice, it just doesn't work for whatever reason. And so, although you kind of said that you weren't thinking about the design consciously, you were at least cognizant of design as being a thing you had to address at some level, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Right?
And I'd say a lot of the work of designing a game was done for me by the fact that I was making a very derivative game, a platformer where you run through a level and hit things, had been done many times before. There was something really new about it. And, I had lots of good games to look at it for inspiration. I think the game Nomolos in particular feels more like a Ninja Gaiden type of platformer than others, because so many enemies can be killed in one hit, and you can just keep moving, and while you're hitting them, it feels like Ninja Gaiden for that.
And how did you, from a technical perspective, so you had the benefit of the wisdom to say, I want to do less rather than more. You didn't say, I'm going to create an MMORPG as my first project, and it's going to be bigger than World of Warcraft, which is what you see a lot in forums, from 13-year-olds who have no idea what they're doing. But where did you find the resources, or how did you figure out the platforming? Because people always look at platforming and go, it's super, platforming, whatever, platformers are easy, but they're not. Kasumi was doing a good job of shredding that apart in the Discord the other day. Where did you find the information, or how did you figure all that stuff out?
So if we restrict to just the jumping physics, I made a very simple QBasic demo when I was about 15, maybe. That was a little cat in armor walking through a scrolling level, and I got as far as being able to press a button, and he would rise into the air, and he would never stop rising into the air until you let go of the button, and then he would fall all the way back down. So I got that far as a teenager, and so I had kind of an idea of how to make a character jump, and kind of an idea of how scrolling might work. But when I revisited these problems doing some NES programming, I had been through college, and in theory was a little bit smarter, I suppose. And I remember tinkering with the movement of Nomolos very slowly and carefully. I started with some pseudocode because I wasn't very good at 6502 at the time, so I tried to sort of puzzle out, like, how would I make him jump? And I think my goal at the time was, like, just make him jump in place. I wasn't thinking about what would happen when he hit things or whatever. All I was thinking about, like, he's sitting somewhere, and how do you make him rise into the air, slow down, and then come back down? And I think that I had been introduced to the idea of fixed point math when I was doing some DOS assembly as a teenager. And I think I learned maybe on some forum somewhere how to do that, like just treating one byte as like the lower bits, and just looking at the higher bytes as the actual coordinate is the basic technique. And I think I remember seeing that re-suggested somewhere on the NES forum, and I was like, oh yeah, I kind of remember doing that in DOS assembly. And so once I learned how to do a 16-bit or a 24-bit add, I eventually I thought about how acceleration works, and just chose an initial negative value. I knew how to use negative numbers in assembly, also from teaching myself assembly as a teenager. So I just experimented with all that stuff until I saw it kind of working, and then tweaked the constants until it looked like a reasonable jump.
Okay, that's
I skipped a lot of details there.
No, that's kind of hard. What I was going to say though is that's interesting, because that approach, I think people assume that everything they do has to be pixel perfect, derived from actual physics. Like if there was an actual cat in armor, this is how he would actually jump if he stood upright, and they fail to maybe see that in games it's just about it feeling right. And what's if anybody's watched the indie game The Movie, you're familiar with, or you've played it, Super Meat Boy. And Tommy, the programmer of that game, was interviewed, and he was asked how he came up with the jumping physics for Super Meat Boy, and the answer was exactly the same kind of thing as you. He had a basic idea of how it was going to work, and then he just tweaked it until it felt right. Before that, he said he was writing real estate software that used SQL databases. So it's kind of I think there's just this weird sort of perception of there's a right way to program games. I mean, there is in the sense that like you want to do it in a performant way that actually works on a system, but like I mean more of this kind of like snooty, like you have to be a PhD in
Oh,
mathematics and physics in order to do it right. Which in some cases is true, like you're doing 3D games and whatnot, but for that doesn't apply to every game out there.
yeah. It turns out the physics for a jump is deceptively simple when programmed because I mean basically like the formula for a I mean I don't remember the formula, but I think the formula for velocity and acceleration, if you break it down, really turns into repeated addition. So like
Mhm.
like for the jump, you set a velocity, and if you don't change that velocity, you're just going to go way up in the air. But as you're going up in the air, you just keep adding the same acceleration value. It's going to get slower and slower and slower until you hit zero, and then it's going to start going faster and faster and faster. And like that's all there is. It's just an add. Like
Yeah.
like when you break down a more advanced math far enough down, all you have is addition and subtraction.
Yeah, it's true, and I think it's being able to tweak your gameplay and really just sit down with it and have patience helps you realize that kind of thing. With Owlia, it's obviously a very different game because Elia is not a platformer, and I assume that part of the reason you wanted to do Elia beyond just the fact that you had that in your mind for over a decade and needed to get it out there was also because it was not a platformer, and you were maybe sick of doing platforming stuff with Nomolos once it was out there and released. Is that true?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I wouldn't. I don't know. Like the three games I had written down were Nomolos, Elia, and Trophy in my projects document, and I might have gone to Trophy after Nomolos. I think I chose Elia because I felt a high degree of urgency to finally finish it because I had wanted to finish it so much as a teenager in QBasic, but then had that falling out with Alex Aranisi, whose name, by the way, was Lord QBasic, rather amusing name. Um, it's finishing the Legends of Owlia actually became a sort of 20-year-long vengeance quest against that guy. And so that sort of remained a thread. And thankfully, though, um, uh, somewhere in the middle of the project, I actually contacted Alex Aranisi and apologized for my own behavior towards him as a teenager, and he actually apologized to me back. It was kind of nice, but all of that didn't matter anymore. The Legends of Owlia became a new project and being made for a new reason, and all of that discomfort from way back then was gone.
Yeah, that's good.
But to answer your original question, yeah, I think that does answer your original question. Why I went to Owlia instead of another platformer.
Yeah, and so then the design of that, you had said on NES Assembly Line, it was sort of an amalgam of ideas, again similar to Nomolos, um, sort of trying to um, go with the minimum. It's funny, you always talk about going with the minimum, but then somehow end up with something that's actually really technically challenging in the game, because I imagine that programming the logic for is it Taito?
Mm-hmm.
It was tough, and then you talked about the 8-way scrolling was extremely
Yeah.
hard.
Yes.
um
Programming Taito was very, very fun, by the way. That was probably one of my favorite things about programming Owlia was making Taito work. Um, one of the coolest, or one of the coolest, but one of the most interesting problems I remember encountering early on was the first thing I programmed was the move where you throw Taito and then he comes back to you.
Mhm.
And um, I used a very, very, very simple tweening technique where you just you just compute a velocity. You take 2 points and you divide the distance in x and y by a certain amount, and then add it to the position, and it will slowly move towards that other point, and it'll slow down as it gets to the second point. And so I use right shifting to do that, because it's a really easy way to do division with binary, and that's how I do him homing in on you. But the problem was, Taito can face in 4 different directions, and I wanted him to face in the direction he was flying based on that velocity I was calculating. And the problem with Taito was that depending on the angle he was at following a Laniel, his left or right position would sort of go as it was going down towards you. Like it would wobble really fast. And so I had to come up with this really crazy scheme where I remembered the last few positions he was pointing, and only allowed him to turn if like the last several attempts to turn were all in the same direction, so I could be reasonably certain. It was like I think you actually call it like a debounce technique in certain circles, and that resolved the wobbliness. So it's crazy how a tiny detail like that can turn into a project.
yeah, but at the same time, that action is super satisfying to interact with. And I think I told you when I first started playing it, one of my favorite things to do was to throw Taito and then walk away so that he followed you on the screen like he was like a little NPC that was just kind of out there following you around the whole time. So yeah, I mean, obviously not something that people necessarily noticed, but for good reason. It's just like very smoothly done.
Yeah, it was fun. And then to visit the 8-way scrolling technical consideration, that one, as you may recall from the assembly line, I kind of regret doing, because it was an awful lot of work, and doing a lot of interesting gameplay in an 8-way scrolling environment is extremely difficult, because I had like a max of like 11 enemies on a given 4-screen by 4-screen area, and when they were not on the screen, I would have them paused, and it just seemed like there wasn't enough action on the overworlds, perhaps. And at one point, I was thinking about looking into making it randomized so that enemies would sort of spawn off screen, and then, but that became too annoying to work out. And then, in addition to the 8-way scrolling, just being incredibly tough to get working as it was, I decided to hide all scrolling glitches with this 16-pixel wide bar at the top. And since I wasn't using MMT3, I had to accomplish this by making sure that my VBlank routine always ran in the same amount of time, so that I could just spin the CPU a certain amount of time and leaving graphics off, so I just have a black bar until a certain time, and then turn graphics back on.
Okay.
It's a pretty simple trick, but it was very difficult to, like, I actually had little lookup tables, which, depending on what was happening that frame, whether it be uploading a column or a row or the palette, would choose a different number of times to just spin the CPU to keep that bar the same size. So I had to tweak that for a ton of different situations. And then there was some stuff in some of the dungeons where, like, the switch puzzles where you jump around on switches. And in those puzzles, I was writing little rectangles to the name table, not instead of columns and rows, and those took different amounts of time and required different lookup tables to keep the bar the same width. So it was awful. I don't know how many hours, dozens of hours I spent tweaking that stupid bar. And so if I had made the entire game screen by screen, I wouldn't have had any of those problems, and I could have focused 100% on gameplay, and I really wish I had done that, to be honest.
And that was all because you were just trying to hide the graphical glitch of the columns and rows loading in and the palette loading in, which you wouldn't have seen on a CRT because it's in the overscan anyway.
That's another funny thing. Like, before I did this crazy bar thing, I borrowed an idea from our friend Julius at MorphCat Games to spread the name table updates between the top row and the bottom row, which, as you're saying on NTSC Overscan, you can't really see them. But I eventually decided that, a lot of people will be playing this on emulators and probably on the AVS, and so I thought it might be pretty distracting having those updates constantly going on the top and the bottom. So I relented and did the horrible approach. I mean, it looked good, but it was horrible for me.
Yeah. No, I can understand that. That sounds excruciating. Brian actually wanted to ask a question, and it's a really good one, I think. How would Nomolos how would it have been different if that was game number 3 instead of game number 1?
Ah, that's a good question. Well, I guess I think it probably would have, we might have, well, I mean, it would probably have some of the technical features that Trophy currently sports. We might have been able to pull off more and larger bosses. The platforming mechanics may have been more interesting or solid, and may have been, yeah, I think those are the main things you'd see that would have been different. I don't know. I'm glad I did it in the order that I did, though. It feels right to be having my third project be this be Trophy, because I mean, Mega Man looms very large in my video game world. I have this sort of shrine to video games, and there's a bunch of games, and there's a bunch of stuff from different games, but at the top is a giant pile of all Mega Man stuff. So it makes sense for.
Yeah, including, I believe you said complete in box Mega Man X3, right?
Yes, and X2. And I would have had X1 complete in box, but I remember as a teenager cutting the box front, like cutting the front of it off for some reason or other. I can't remember why, but I would go back and slap my younger self, be like, you should have kept that box in perfect condition, because you'll have all 3 someday on a shelf.
Yeah. My wife teases me because now I save all boxes of everything, but I will firmly blame my mother for the box thing, because I had no real good place to keep the boxes, so they were kind of stacked in an area of my room, and she would get annoyed that I just had empty cardboard boxes. And so at one point I had to kind of decide what I was going to do with the boxes, and I couldn't bear parting with A Link to the Past, but many of my other games I got rid of the boxes despite not wanting to, and it's kind of heartbreaking now to know that's something that people really. I mean, I always cared about it, and it seems like you cared about it too. But to see now that it's such a historical piece of not even game collecting, but just your childhood.
Yep.
So what is this? Oh, so Banshaku said that he or she, is it he or she? It seems like they know you.
Oh, hey Fred.
So he then he said he keeps them, but it's hard because of lack of space in Japan. So let me sort of transition away from the design question.
I should. It's cool to see Banshaku on the chat here, because he actually helped me out a lot early on when I was working on Nomolos. I actually emailed him a whole bunch, and he gave me some advice. And he actually got me. He helped me get started with CA65. He actually sent me a template and helped me figure out how to use that.
Oh, cool.
He actually took a look at some of my very early NES code and kind of jogged my memory that I should try to abstract things out a little bit, and put my controller code into a routine instead of just calling it right there in the main loop. So yeah, it's cool to see him here, because he was a big influence on me early on.
Nice. Yeah, it's fun to see the people that jump in and contribute questions and just are watching the stream. But so I wanted to ask you. I like asking this question. What was the first thing that you encountered that made you want to quit NES programming?
Wait, quit? I'm not quitting.
No. What was the first thing that I didn't say that made you quit, made you want to quit?
Oh, I understand. Well, oh, you know what? Actually, I had such an experience within just a couple of days of first starting it. I had done a little bit of that NES 101 tutorial and had started making my own graphics tools in C# at the time that could take a drawing and turn it into CHR data and so on, and actually output like you could draw a name table in it and output the name table data, and I would put it in the NES 101 demo and see it on the screen.
Mm-hmm.
The output of this tool did not wrap the .db data, so I'd have like .db and then a whole bunch of bytes that went on for, I don't know, 120 characters or longer or something.
I know where this is going.
And so I'd paste this. Oh, and so the NES 101 tutorial, the assembler was called P65, which is a 6502 assembler written in Perl by the guy that made the tutorial, I think. And it was actually a rather nice assembler, and I don't remember having much trouble with it. But then I noticed, I don't know if it was NES Dev or Nintendo Age, that folks were using NESasm. So I thought, oh, I should use NESasm. It's the NES assembler, so I should use it. So I started. So I learned how to port my NES 101 code to that, and then I pasted my nametable DB statements in there, and then my nametable wasn't showing up right, and I had no idea why. Like, I had this little piece of code that I borrowed from the NES 101 tutorial about how to copy 1024 bytes over into the right location VRAM, and it was working before, but with my pasted nametable code in there, it just wasn't working. And so I eventually wound up unrolling the loop that was drawing to the nametable, and eventually it dawned on me that NESasm was silently ignoring characters after about the 80th column or so. And like, so before I discovered this, I was just pulling my hair out. I thought, I can't do this. I'm just, this is too hard for me. I have to quit and try another type of game development because I'm just not smart enough for this stuff. But once I finally realized that, I was just like, oh, and never have used NESasm ever again since that. And I'm not saying it's a bad assembler. Tons of people use it just fine and make amazing games in it and deal with its quirks, but that turned me off of it pretty bad early on. And I moved to ASM 6 after that, which is similar in simplicity to NESasm, but has none of those quirks that I'm aware of. And then eventually moved to CA65.
Yeah, so it's interesting because I think the simplicity of NESasm is appealing, but when you hit things like that, I mean, it's like any tool where it should be simple, but there's some weird little bug that just makes you want to scream, cry, whatever, right? And all of those at the same time.
Interestingly, I over the years I've encountered a couple of bugs in CA65 which were similarly large head scratchers. So I mean, I think a lot of tools have funny quirks and that you'll run into eventually.
Yeah, but I think you mentioned earlier that you're stubborn and persistent, and I think that's the hallmark of any good programmer, though.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So you already mentioned you use CA65 for when you build your code. Do you use any IDEs, or what tools do you do your art in? Because I know everybody kind of has their own way of doing that.
So I don't really have an IDE, but I use Notepad++, and it's a really wonderful, full of programmery features text editor, and it's got lots of fun little plugins. Like there's this one called NPP exec, which you can set up to launch different programs right from within Notepad++. So I have it set up where I just have a key combination that will launch my graphics editor, my level editor, it will launch FamiTracker, and at a press of a button, it will clean, compile, and run my ROM in Nintendulator, Nestopia, and now Mason. It was FCEUX for a long time. So yeah, that's what I use for developing code. And it also has a nice code colorizing feature. So I have my own set of settings in there for highlighting opcodes and numbers and registers and stuff like that. I haven't gone so far as to use I know some folks have adapted more powerful IDEs to provide IntelliSense and so on, but I've found that the scope of games for the NES that I'm making myself are small enough that I can usually remember things, and it's not too hard to go look things up. So IntelliSense just feels like overkill for a project of this size.
Mm-hmm.
So I haven't gone that far myself. In terms of graphics, my wife Lori, who does all the art for my games, uses Photoshop, which I think is total overkill for pixel art, but that's what she uses because she's used to it, which is fine. And so she gives me pings of the graphics she makes, and then I feed them to a graphics editor I wrote in Python, and then it sorts out what the palette should be and whether any NES constraints have been violated, and then converts that to CHR data and name table data, and sometimes sprite data and palette data and all that kind of stuff.
Cool.
And then for music, obviously, I use FamiTracker.
Right, and then of course you are the author and maintainer of ggsound,
Mm-hmm.
which is a really widely used sound engine. I've seen I haven't used it yet, but I've seen the tutorial. You did a video, right, of how to use it?
Yes, I did. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I've watched that, and it seems really simple. So I mean, it seems
I think it works, and it's used by a lot of folks. And I'd say its best attribute is that I think it's probably the easiest one to use out there.
Mm-hmm.
And has the fewest weird issues that you run into when you try to convert songs. I mean, it still has issues. People will still run into issues because it's there's a lot of details that go into having things correct. Mainly because with a lot of NES sound engines, the goal is to make it not have as many features as FamiTracker has, so that it uses a lot less CPU time. And so folks tend to find that confusing because they'll expect to be able to convert anything, and something won't work because ggsound, in the instructions it says doesn't support this. So so it's sort of a stumbling block for some folks, but despite that, people are using it, and it's fun actually that it wound up becoming something people use, because for a while I was sort of discouraged that would ever be the case, because I introduced my sound engine before it was called ggsound on NES Dev as just sound engine, which is probably the most boring name you could possibly come up with for a library. And I had added a plugin, an actual C++ DLL plugin to FamiTracker to convert FamiTracker to this sound engine data, and I introduced this on NES Dev. And right around the same time, Shiru released Famitone, which is an excellent sound engine, and I think it's probably the most widely used, although that might not be true anymore, I'm not sure, NES sound engine. And I think just due to the catchy name and the fact that I think he did a couple things in a more straightforward way than I did at the time, a lot of people adopted it, and then my sound engine sort of fell off the map. But an NES homebrew came out, I think it was in 2010 or 2014, I can't remember when it was, but Starkeeper was released by surprise on Nintendo Age, and the fellow who wrote it said he used my sound engine. He found it on FamiTracker's website, and I was like, whoa, somebody used my stuff. It was really encouraging, and it made me really happy, and I was like, okay, maybe I should keep maintaining this thing. And so that's what inspired me to turn it into ggsound.
And that's really cool. It's definitely, I think it's hard when you're working on a project and you feel like nobody's using it, even if that's not true. But even for non-game stuff, it's we've talked about this a little bit. You are sort of insulated from your users of your work-related stuff, and my previous job, I was similarly sort of insulated from, support was they were the only people who were supposed to talk to customers, and I wanted to talk to the people using the software. Like, I wanted to talk to people who actually gave a damn about what I was doing, and even if they said, "Hey, it sucks and I hate it," at least you can ask them why, right? Like, why am I wasting my time on something if somebody hates it? But at least you can find out and maybe fix it.
Yep.
So, Bonchaku said that he uses Visual Studio Code, which a lot of people like. I like Sublime Text and Visual Studio Code. I like that they have some sort of advanced multi-line features. Anyway, I just wanted to put that into the stream here so that it's recorded, so that since the chat won't be there. But cool. And we all in the community, we know you all you use Git, and
Yep.
not only do you use Git, but you use Git in ways that I didn't know were even possible, including things like the Git bisect. Yes. Why don't you explain that a little bit?
Okay. Well, I mean,
just briefly, you don't have to go into the details of what it is.
Yeah, I love using source control. It's sort of a replacement for my long-term memory about what I've done with my code. And I mean, it's like super simple to use as a solo developer, and Git, you can just install it, and then when you want to initialize it in a given folder with your code, you just say git init, and then it makes this little hidden folder called .git, and then it's basically an infinitely, it's an infinite undo stack, basically. Like if you could never ever have your editor forget what you changed in your code, that's basically what it is. Only you have to say when it takes a snapshot of what you've done. But yeah, Git bisect. I like it because I don't really write any like unit testing or regression test suites for my games. So whenever a regression comes up that I don't know, I don't have any clue why it's happening, I can use Git bisect to very, very quickly discover why something broke. So instead of hunting painstakingly through who knows how much code to find the cause of a problem, I can just run Git bisect, and it will, and what it does is it takes me through the Wayback Machine, so to speak, and it will present me with a snapshot of the game, from a certain point in time, and then it will basically ask me, does this have the bug or not? And I run it, and I'm like, okay, it has the bug. And it's like, all right, well, okay, so we're almost there, but I need to show you another snapshot of the game. So it shows me another snapshot and says, does this one have the bug? And I say, no, that one doesn't have the bug. And so what it does is it kind of keeps slicing in half this big list of snapshots of your game until it finds, the commit at which the bug was introduced. And it tells you, it'll actually tell you after you said yes and no to whether each snapshot has the bug, that it was introduced in this commit. And the cool thing at that point is you can ask Git, okay, what lines of code did I change when this bug happened? And it'll show you the 5 to 10 lines of code that you changed. And then usually I'll be like, well, of course it's happening. I forgot to put this thing in this bank, or I forgot to set the bank to 0, and it's usually something like that. Like almost all the time when I have some kind of crazy garbage graphics bug, it's because I forgot something with a bank number or putting something in the wrong bank. It's like, it's almost always the case.
Or I remember the first time you showed us that on the Discord, I was like, this is sorcery. That is insane, that it works that way. It's pretty cool, and it's amazing to see that even using the tool every day, there are so many things that, I don't even know about, because I use it for work and for my own stuff. So it was neat to see you kind of take it beyond just the sort of basic commit and reset functionality that everybody who uses it is pretty familiar with.
Yeah, and it's a really interesting topic to me, because I know that there are a number of folks in the scene who don't use source control at all, who don't have trouble without it. They make amazing games without source control, which amazes me, because I couldn't live without it personally. But it's just a very interesting thing, because it seems to me that that the scope of the game, of the type of software we make, is, I think, at a level that it is manageable without a tool like this. I think that the folks have shown they develop a workflow and an approach that works fine for them. And I think in a way, when in a certain sense, using a tool like this does produce a kind of crutch in a way, because you are not forced to remember certain things about your code. You can always rely on it to tell you things like where you change code and so on. That said, though, I mean, I can't imagine living without it. It's just like it's so useful, and it's so clean. Like, I never ever have piles of different copies of my code everywhere and not knowing what I changed in what. I always have just one folder with the current version, and if I want to see the old ones, I can ask it to tell me. But it's just this nice clean little folder, and it's very neat.
Yeah. No, it's true, and I think with smaller projects, it's definitely easier to do. Did you end up watching that link that forget who shared that? It was John Romero interviewing Nasser Gabelli, who programmed the Final Fantasy games. Oh, so I'll have to dig that up again. He's talking to him about how he programmed games when he was at Square. He doesn't write comments. He didn't use any sort of source control, I believe. But he said that basically he wrote the games fast enough so that he didn't have to have any of those things, because once he was done, and he never had to go back to it again.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I feel like I keep like it feels like I'm like, if I'm going through a really complex maze, and I have like I can leave a breadcrumb trail to find my way back through the maze. That's kind of how source control feels. Like it's like going through a maze without having any mechanism of remembering where you were, versus having some kind of mechanism of remembering where you were. It's like that, and I feel a tremendous sense of comfort every time I drop another breadcrumb. Like, okay, it's in there now, and if I need to know. Oh, and another great thing is, like, anytime I make a change, you write a little blurb, commit message saying hopefully why he made that change, and I try as hard as I can, as frequently as I can, to make a very verbose message as to exactly why I've made the changes that I made. And often when there's a bug, I can look at my message and think, what the heck was I thinking, or whatever, or think, oh, that makes sense, that kind of thing, and helps sort of have a dialogue with my past self about why I made changes to the code. So your code becomes a four-dimensional object rather than a two-dimensional one. Like if you just have your one snapshot of code, you don't know how it changed, and how it changed is like, it's really important to know, or it's very useful.
Yeah, it's well, I was going to say, so it makes me think of like all the times where it's I think helped with coworker relationships also, because there are plenty of times where I've looked at code and said, who's the idiot that wrote this code? And you go back to your commit and you're like, oh, I'm the idiot that wrote that code.
Yep, that's happened to me many, many times. In fact, I've gotten to the point where I just assume that it was me that wrote it.
Yeah, agreed. So to kind of round us out, because we've been going for a while now. what do you really like about the NES development community?
It's a wonderful community. I love being here. I made so many friends here, and it's a wonderful place. It's been incredibly encouraging and helpful from the start. I mean, there may be a couple of personalities on NES Dev who are a bit gruff at times, but none of them ever came anything close to the sort of unpleasant personalities that I encountered in the Key Basic RPG scene like 20 years ago. They are all wonderful and very generous. Like any question you ask, there's a NES Dev, there will be an answer very, very quickly. And I've just never had a bad experience on NES Dev or Nintendo Age. These wonderful people, and I think also, in addition to the learning, the coding side, there is a tremendous amount of enthusiasm anytime anyone makes a game, and that it feels really good. Like on Nintendo Age, aside from the colleagues in the development scene, there are a lot of people there who just love what the homebrewers make and will lap up what they make instantly whenever a game is released to collect the game. And maybe some of them put them on shelves right away. I don't know, but enough of them play it and have nice feedback that it's really really nice to. It feels really good to participate in.
Yeah, and that's I totally agree with what you said, and also some very some truly amazing people who do this and develop some amazing things that I don't think they'd have the opportunity to maybe make the kinds of projects they're making if the community didn't exist.
Yeah, that's definitely another thing. Like, I mean, I'm so grateful to all the folks that made all this possible. I mean, some of the guys that were originally reverse engineered the system. Like, if it weren't for those guys, I wouldn't be doing this at all, because reverse engineering and electrical engineering and so forth wasn't something I learned. It wasn't my forte. I've always been a software guy, so I could not have done this at all if it weren't for those guys. And I'm deeply grateful to them, because it's been such an incredibly fun ride.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing, because I don't know, I feel like a lot of us had the same sort of experience, which is that we got into this first by playing the games through emulators, and kind of that magic of, wait, I can play Super Mario Brothers on my PC? How is that possible? And then sort of what's that?
Testicle on DOS.
Yeah, exactly. But there was something inherently kind of magic about that, and then learning about the process of what goes into making the games and emulating the games, and to know that the emulators existed in the mid 90s, right?
Yeah, an interesting tidbit on this is that when I was back when I was interacting with that Lord Q Basic fellow, I remember, I was in at that point I was a very chaotic state, trying different projects and stuff. And at one point, I remember talking to him and saying, "I'm going to make an NES emulator." And I think I may have been aware of the early NES stuff back then, because I think I actually downloaded and looked at one of the NES programming text documents that's been floating around all this time. But back then, I think that, like, I really think I peeked at it long before I actually got into it as an adult. But I didn't do anything with it at the time. There weren't any tutorials, and I don't think there were any homebrew games out at the time at all. So yeah.
Yeah, that's one of those things where I felt like I knew more than maybe what my I knew more than other people my age, but had I even looked at something like that, I'm not sure I would have known where to begin. Like, I don't think I would have had the knowledge necessary to really understand like what was required to take the document and turn that into something that actually produced a sprite moving on the screen, if nothing else. so there's something to be said about age and experience as well. What is there anything about the community that you don't like that is kind of a turnoff or just like a pet peeve of yours?
Honestly, I don't really think so. Like every once in a while, there comes along someone who's somewhat unpleasant, but usually when they become unpleasant enough, and Nintendo H deals with them, and they're gone very quickly. And so I don't personally have any qualms with anything. I mean, yeah, like I hear rumblings about various unpleasantness, but I just don't seem to be aware of it. Like I I stick to my game development and the brewery section on Nintendo Age and NES Dev and Discord, and it's all unicorns and rainbows in my world.
Well, NES Homebrew said that was a loaded question, and I wasn't trying to steer you towards some of the epic rants that you've had on the Discord before. I will mention Dunning-Kruger, if that's the right way to pronounce that, because you're fond of pointing out how, as you said before, the conceptual gap of thinking about something and then actually executing on it is a common failing for people who are coming into the hobby, thinking that they can point and click their way through. But let's not get into that now.
Did you want to discuss NES Maker?
No, I did not. Well, I mean, we can if you want to, but I was not specifically going to ask about that.
Well, it's a very interesting piece of software. I really think the biggest problem with it is just that the tagline is wrong. No programming required turned out not to be really true.
It's such good marketing, though.
The truth of that software is it is a very elaborate ROM hack tool, legal ROM hack tool for Mystic Searches. That's what it is. And I actually told the creator of NES Maker that's what it was early on. But, you know, it is what it is. It's a fine thing, and it's encouraging lots of folks to get into it, and that's nice. So, yeah.
What I think is good about it is there are an incredible number of people who are interested in homebrew, and if even a small fraction of them get interested enough that they're willing to put in the work into either customizing what NES Maker makes or even learning 6502, I think the community is better for it. But I think there's going to be a pretty large gap of time before we see that sort of play out.
Yeah, something that's really fascinating to me is 10 years ago, there was a fellow who posted a video on YouTube and was shared in the NES Dev forum, called himself Joe Cracker. And he said that he was going to create this big project called NES ROM Maker. Mm-hmm. And everyone just laughed at him at the time and thought, you know, no one's ever going to make anything even remotely like this, because it's not possible, because every game is totally different. And so to see someone actually try to make a real NES ROM Maker is pretty mind-blowing. Like, to even see somebody even try it, just have the audacity to even try it, it's incredible. Like, I tip my hat to Joe for having the extreme audacity and energy to even attempt to tackle that. It's just completely blows my mind.
And energy is a good word for it, because I mean, say what you want, they've been working really hard at what they're trying to do. So
they certainly are.
Yeah,
it's incredible. It's quite a spectacle. You know, it's a spectacle. I wish them all well, and it seems like there are a number of folks who are becoming aware of the broader community and deciding that the ins and outs of NES Maker aren't for them, and they'd rather do things from the ground up. And I think they're probably going through the same mental process that I did with RPG Maker XP. Like, I don't want things to be done for me. I want to make the decisions about how the game is made.
Yeah, and I with tools like that, I don't know if it's back to the stubbornness thing on my part. Similarly, it just felt like because I played around with RPG Maker and Unity and a bunch of other tools like that, I always just felt like it wasn't fun at that point. It was more of a, how do I make somebody else's program do what I want to do?
Mm.
At that point, it's kind of like I'm not making a game anymore. I'm just sort of beating up a piece of software until it submits.
Yeah,
Which
exactly.
that's not fulfilling or entertaining to me.
Yeah, and the advantage to working from a blank slate is like you get to build on all of your own ideas. So if there's ever any problem, you're the only person that can blame for it, and you have total, like, from the ground up knowledge of everything you've done from the beginning, and like this intimate familiarity with every detail of what you've made, and so that you can make it exactly how you want, with no compromises. And so it's it's nice.
Yeah, and then also the fact, and we've talked about this a lot on Discord, that when something goes wrong, 99% of the time it's your fault. Versus modern software development in any field, where it's like it could be you, it could be the compiler, it could be the third-party library, it could be the development tools, it could be the operating system, it could be network latency. It's like there are hundreds of possible things that could be wrong, that now you have to figure out why what you wrote, which should be working, is not working.
Yep.
Yeah, and then on the NES, you don't have any of that. It's just like it's you and the NES, and generally when it's not working, you messed up.
Yep.
So last question, and then I will let you retire for the evening. And I will add that I especially appreciate that you did this today, because I know that Wednesday is normally reserved for your NES programming. So I appreciate that.
True, but I was able to get something cool working on Trophy prior to this stream.
Okay, so then I feel less bad.
Yep, I'm working on the second form of the final boss.
Oh, cool. All right, well, I'm excited to see that, because the game is, like I said before, it's really cool, and it's gonna be, I think it's gonna be big. We didn't really touch on ROM hacks versus homebrew. We'll see if you have the energy to do it before the last question.
I can go forever if you want to.
Well, last question that I have, and then we'll see if you want to talk about that. So what's changed the most about the community since you kind of entered into it?
That's a very fun question. I'd say that the introduction of Kickstarter into the scene was probably the biggest single change I can think of. Because I think it was about 2014 or so, both Mystic Searches and Lizard were announced that year. And prior to that, everything was very sort of obscure and small, and mainly released on Retro USB and advertised on Nintendo Age. And I think I really found the quietude of the scene at that time very, very appealing. Like I liked that there wasn't any like pressure to make a big deal out of yourself or try to make a lot of money. It's just like, I made a game, I wanted to make a game, and here's my game, and see what happens. And I really, really liked that. So when Kickstarter, when a couple of folks were using Kickstarter, I felt really intimidated actually by this, and because I wanted it to stay like very small and quiet and insulated. I guess I don't know how to describe it, but I really didn't like how it felt at first. And I thought that the scene was going to get so big that folks would show up that hit this, basically just hit the stratosphere and leave me in the dust, so to speak, and that I would be relegated to the dustbin of history or something. I don't know how. I don't really know, but I mentally adjusted to it just fine. And it's the new sort of standard way to fund game projects. But I guess the only concern I have in light of that change is that like when I released Nomolos, relative to a lot of more recent homebrews, it's kind of a crude game. Like it's a good game. I know it's good and people like it, but it's fairly crude compared to a lot of more recent games. And so it makes me worried, like, what if an enthusiastic fellow shows up and wants to make a platformer from the ground up, and doesn't want to, necessarily reach or the level of some of the more prominent names coming out? Would their game be received with as much warmth and enthusiasm as Nomolos was? I hope so. But there's something about having Kickstarter in the scene that makes it feel like you have to make a big production out of each game, and I think that it may be discouraging to some folks, maybe not. I'm not really sure. And so it was an adjustment period for me when that was introduced to the scene.
Yeah, and I understand. And I think the idea that I think your reaction was maybe more of the fear of it losing some of the sort of personal relationships of it, where suddenly it's easy when there are a small number of people in the scene to kind of know everybody, right, and have that relationship with them. But if suddenly you're getting 50, 60 new people coming in, because I mean, you use Micro Mages as an example because it was a phenomenal success, and when it comes to Kickstarter, and it's such a cool looking game. I can't wait
that game.
Yeah, I know. I can't wait to play it.
And that couldn't have happened to a better person. I'm so happy that Julius's game is doing so well like this.
Yeah,
it's fantastic.
Yeah, so it's like you can see how that might attract I don't want to say the wrong people with different goals, right, in mind. And but I think it's no different than anything else. The early people involved in anything kind of always feel a little bit disenfranchised when more people get involved. It's like when people, they stop listening to a band because they make it big, right? And they're like, oh, I used to listen to them, but then they got famous. I don't listen to them.
Yeah, and it's super interesting thinking about this, because when I was working on Nomolos, I knew that there were a lot of games on the NES from the NES library that were crude themselves, and I thought, well, but people still love those games because they're old and because they're rough around the edges. A lot of them, like some of them are really polished and amazing, but there's still a sizable number of games that were playable and fun and people fondly remember, but kind of rough around the edges. And so I thought, if I make a game that's rough around the edges, people will like it in this scene, and people aren't expecting something to be ultra polished. They'd be okay if it's kind of, So I think that the introduction of a lot of the Kickstarters and the competition around that and so on has eroded the feeling that something crude may be acceptable still.
Yeah, I
which is too bad, because I mean, I don't know. Like there are certain objective attributes that are sort of tacitly have become competition. Not negative competition. I'm not saying that like the great thing about the scene is, like, I think a lot of the folks making games, none of them feel competitive towards each other as far as I know. I don't feel that towards anybody. I don't feel it towards me or anything. It's very friendly, but there's definitely some objective competition going on with respect to technical features, how good the graphics are relative to the best releases in the past, and so on. Yet at the same time, there is a such thing as a game which does not try to match those objective characteristics of better, but is still really, really good and really, really compelling and personal. Mm-hmm. And I'd say the homebrewer who I'd say most fits into that category for me is Roth of Sly Dog Studios. He has this very he's stuck to what he refers to as the black box style of graphics, and he's always incredibly creative with with gameplay, and his creations are always incredibly personal. And he's like the most humble dude in the whole scene, and probably the least celebrated, perhaps. I mean, for a core number of us, we are all big fans of him. But I feel like he deserves more attention, because games like Mad Wizard, Rise of Amandus, and Black Box Challenge to me are just unbelievably creative and really deep gameplay, and very engaging and fascinating, and none of them are trying to impress anybody with graphics or technical features or anything. They're just great games. And so I guess yeah. I don't know where I was going with all that.
Yeah, no, that's I mean that's a great point, and I mean, I think that we see that over and over again with all games, right? Like regardless of platform, it's there are always games that are going to come out and that will blister your eyeballs and blow out your eardrums with 12.1 surround and 8K HDR plus ×2 whatever graphics, right? But like that doesn't make them a good game. They may look pretty, or sound great, but that's not what's going to keep you playing the game. So while I definitely understand the concern there, I mean, I think that's no different than, if anything, that actually makes it more like quote unquote professional game development, right? Where now you're kind of a little bit more having to wade through getting your message across to people who are just looking at the graphics, versus versus before, where people were kind of looking at the game just as a whole without saying, oh, the graphics are amazing, so I'm going to play it, or this doesn't look so good, so I'm not going to play it. People were just happy, and I think that's still probably true. People are just happy that these games are coming out for the original NES. So do you want to talk ROM hacks versus homebrews, or do you want to wrap it for tonight?
Yeah, we can chat about that, but I had more thoughts on some of this thread that we're just discussing.
Okay, go ahead.
What was I thinking? Oh, so having made this third game, I as a consequence of it, I've gotten very interested in game design itself. Like I never really was that interested. Like these three games, I wanted to make them strictly derivative. I was not interested in inventing something new, but now I am, and like I'm like scaling it back further. Like I was calling myself an indie dev for a long time, and I put Owlia on Steam for a while, but I got really overwhelmed by the managing a digital presence and the social media updates and the fact that the game wasn't really making money on Steam, and thinking about how I'd have to promote it and everything. And I just decided this wasn't for me. So I took that off of Steam, and I'm still going to release Trophy, I think, through Kickstarter in some form. But I think after that, I'm probably not going to try very much to, make it big or make money on games. I'm scaling back to pure hobbyist state, and I've realized through this, after all of this, that is why I do it. I do it for the satisfaction and pleasure of creating games. I have almost no care in the world for whether I'm making money or gaining attention or anything like that. It's just the joy of making games, and I'm feeling much better about things as a result.
Yeah, I mean that's a lot of pressure, right? Like
I've turned my brain back to where it was when I was releasing Nomolos. I've just sort of chosen to unplug from all that because it just became too much for me. Like some folks really thrive on that sort of thing, but it's just purely, it really isn't for me. I'm just purely a hobbyist at heart.
Yeah, and you've been what's that?
I said I would not call myself a professional. Purely a hobbyist.
Okay, then I will refrain from calling you professional based on that distinction that you made. But and then you've also started looking at Pico 8 and other the Atari 2600 as other sort of viable platforms to make games, both I guess from the perspective of, because it's different than the NES or similar to the NES in different ways, but also because of the idea that it takes away that financial pressure, it sounds like.
Yeah, and I'm just realizing, like I remember when I was like 13, I was doing QBasic, and I got to a certain point in my studies, and I was having so much fun writing little programs in QBasic. And I went to my mom because she had signed me up for tutoring in QBasic. That's how I got started. And I remember going up to my mom, and I was like, "Mom, I love programming." And so, even though I had that hiatus through college, and I'm getting back into it, and then I've made these 3 games, and now I'm scaling back to pure hobbies form, I'm realizing that is very, very true. I love programming, and that's why I do it. I do it for the feeling of pleasure I get when I craft code. That's why I'm doing it. And the game design has become a hobby too, but the main motivating factor through all of this adventure has been the joy of coding.
Yeah, I can totally relate to that. And actually, a coworker of mine made a joke today. We were celebrating someone's birthday at the office, and we get together and have some ice cream cake. And he was joking at how he's one of those weird people who, after he's done with a full day of programming, he goes home to work on his private programming project that has nothing to do with work, but is still just sitting in front of a computer programming. And that sort of is exactly what you just described, right? And it's that love of the craft, that pure enjoyment of just getting code out and putting together the bytes to do something, which I think motivates most of the people in the NES dev scene, which is a unique thing.
Yeah, and like I'm like contrasting the different feelings I have in different situations. Like when I released NES games and get feedback from people playing it, that feels really great. But I find I don't need very much of that. Like like a handful of people who have a genuine response, that's enough validation. I don't, like, even though on some level it sounds great to like make the next Celeste or the next Super Meat Boy or something. I don't really need that. It's like it's enough to make a game and have a handful of friends on a forum appreciate it.
Yeah, that's awesome, and I think you'd be hard pressed to find too many people that at least within the community that would disagree with that sentiment. Not saying there aren't people who would, but I think not too many. Okay, ROM hack versus homebrew. This is coming up over and over again. So, and the reason I wanted to bring it up was because one of the things that you mentioned early on when you kind of started talking about Trophy, before we even knew you were working on something called Trophy, I think you just said you were working on a project, and you were kind of releasing little tidbits of things here, a song here or whatever. One of the things that you voiced was the misconception of the people out in the broader world of what constitutes a ROM hack and what constitutes actual homebrew, and like how to convince people. I mean, you talked about it a little bit, but Trophy, or a decent amount, but Trophy is essentially, at its core, a love letter to Mega Man. But you wrote every single line of that code.
Yep. With the exception of the system detector by Teppels.
Okay. Fair enough.
And a random number generator from NES Dev.
Which I think we all have used for
arctangent 2 lookup table.
Okay, so you wrote what, 99.95% of that code, right? So and I'm not sure that we can answer that here. That would be cool if we could. But what is your thought on? I guess first of all, ROM hacks versus homebrews in terms of, I think from a technical perspective, the difference is clear. But in terms of, first of all, your perception of what are ROM hacks cool? Are they just a thing that just happens and they're not really programming? Or what is your perspective on that?
I think ROM hacks vary very widely. Some of them are just CHR data replacements, but they can become extremely sophisticated to the point where they're there's some significant engineering that goes into them, like understanding the code and being able to add to them and even add new enemy movements and so on. There are some very, very impressive ROM hacks out there. I'm not actually personally very interested in playing them, but I've seen enough of them to be like, whoa, there's some serious stuff going on there. So it can be a very respectable and fascinating pursuit. And sometimes it does fun things like I remember being bugged by Star Tropics music being funky and cutting off. And so when Rain Warrior posted his blog on the Lizard blog about just went in and fixed it, I was just like, that is so cool. He just went in and figured out what was wrong with the Star Tropics music engine and fixed it. So I mean, I think ROM hacking is a very cool thing. I just haven't been all that interested in it because I like making things from the ground up, so that's what I've been doing. And it's funny because like in the community, we all know what homebrew means. It means a personal labor of love made from the ground up, that's totally original. But in the broader gaming world, homebrew has a very loose meaning, and it just means some dude in his living room making the game. And it seems to often be associated with ROM hacks and things that are kind of gray area, maybe slightly illegal, and so and that seems to be the most broad understanding of the word out there. And so like I actually sold some copies of Nomolos and Elia to a local retro game store. They actually have a chain with like 5 stores around here, and I explained to them in very careful terms, as carefully as I could, that it was a completely original game from the ground up by somebody who lived in their local area. Not they understood this, but on their Facebook page, they were like, we're selling a bunch of homebrew hacks. And Nomolos was sitting there right next to a bunch of repros and games that were, illegal. And Nomolos legal, ROM hacks illegal. Although I think ROM hacks are cool and so on, and I don't personally, have a problem with them, I would like my games to be, when somebody's going to sell them, to be like, this was made by a dude in your town, like from the ground up, like it's original, and there's nothing shady about it. It's not illegal. It's completely original, but people don't care, like at all, like, and they don't want to care, like. Folks who are actually buying those are just people who are like, oh yeah, I just dusted off my old NES and I just got these like some ROM hacks and I got this cool game called Nomolos, and they don't care, they don't want to dig deeper, they just want some games to play.
Yeah, and it's interesting. So Bonchaku pointed out an important thing, which is that they're they're totally different skill sets in a certain sense, because while they both require understanding coding, one requires looking at somebody else's code and understanding it to the point where you can make it do what you want, for the more sophisticated hacks anyway, versus writing your own stuff from the ground up. I think the other big problem is that you get since so much of what's out there is on things like live streams on Twitch and YouTube, you get big YouTube gamers who don't understand and misattribute. I think you had mentioned this today, but it drives me nuts whenever on AVGN they're playing a ROM hack and they're like, oh, this is a homebrew, and it's like, no, no, some dude hacked Castlevania to make it harder and like crazy and whatever, and that's fine. Like you said, there's nothing wrong with that approach to making a new game, but it is not like they wrote their own version of Castlevania, right? They did not make their own version of like Curse of the Moon. You know, you could see someone arguing, well, that's a ROM hack, even though it's totally not, because it looks like Castlevania with different graphics and plays
Talking about
on.
that new Steam game that's basically like a love letter to Castlevania.
No, I'm talking about sorry, did you say Bloodstained?
Oh yeah, that's what I meant. Bloodstained the Moon, right?
Yeah.
It's a PC game, correct?
Well, it's on Switch and PlayStation and other stuff, but it's an 8-bit style, essentially Castlevania game. And it's actually pretty faithful to the way that the NES renders things. I mean, if you did a detailed analysis, I'm sure you could find out where it's like the, you know, stuff like the way it scrolls the backgrounds maybe isn't possible or something, but it, for all intents and purposes, it looks like an NES game. And like I said, I mean, somebody could argue that is a ROM hack, right? Like they just took the old NES ROM of Castlevania and put their new Bloodstained graphics in it, but it's not. Like they wrote that from scratch. And I think the thing for me is like explaining that homebrew is actually like truly software development from the ground up versus a hack where it's almost like you're building it with something like RPG Maker or whatever. Like the framework is there, you're just making it work differently than what it was originally built to do.
Yep. And it brings me back to NES Maker. It's the first full-featured legal ROM hack tool.
Yeah, and that is actually sort of a cool distinction, I think, because people are of course expecting it to do literally everything and anything, but if you position it like you said as like a ROM hack tool, then people who at least understand what ROM hacking is will be like, oh, so it does what it does, but I can change the graphics or tweak it a little bit here and there. And then the amount that I can tweak it is dependent on my level of sophistication and work that I put into it to understanding how it works. Right. Like, which is what, I mean, you get these elaborate ones like, I don't know that it's the one that always kind of amazes me is the Zelda randomizer, where it doesn't change the graphics or anything, but like the person who made that had to understand exactly how Zelda worked in order to change the assets and the placements and all that other stuff, and then also make sure that they didn't break the game and make it unsolvable by doing that. That's like,
it is amazing. I haven't really looked into those randomizers, but they sound quite impressive.
yeah. So it's Banchiku is saying we're going to start a nerd war now. But that's not the point. Like I'm not trying to say that we need to differentiate between ROM hacks and homebrews because there's any.
I have immense respect for ROM hackers, but it's just sort of a world that I don't really delve into, and I just don't really know much about it. And I'm not
it's
them myself, but I just will look at them from a distance, and I'm like, whoa, that's pretty cool stuff, and then I just keep doing my homebrew.
Yeah, it's different. I mean, if you, the thing that I think people would understand is it's the difference between someone who buys a car and mods it by buying, exhausts and turbos and intercoolers and all that other stuff versus someone who's like, no, I'm building a car from scratch. Like I made this chassis. This is not a chassis from a Ford Focus. This is like, I made this.
I welded it together with my bare hands.
Exactly. It sounds way more manly than I typed it out in 6502 assembly. But it's the same concept, right? Like you could get someone who does crazy stuff to their car where it's like, I don't know if you've ever seen those kit cars where they take a Pontiac Fiero and turn it into essentially a Ferrari or something that looks like a Ferrari, even though underneath it, it's still a Fiero. you know, to me, that's like a really elaborate ROM hack, but underneath the covers, it's still a Pontiac. It's not, they didn't build a brand new car from the ground up. Still takes skill, right? Like I couldn't do it. I couldn't do either one, but
like the act of studying a disassembly of a ROM that has no comments and no routine names and nothing, no variable names or anything, and learning how it works is incredible to me. Like, I think if I wanted to do that, if I wanted to make my own disassembly of an NES ROM, that would be a project, and it would take me probably as long as it takes to code an NES game, to be completely honest.
Yeah.
It would take a really long time.
Yeah, no,
So
it
impresses the hell out of me, to be honest.
Yeah, no, same here.
Folks who love ROM hacking, that's how I know how to code, because people were doing that. So like, I definitely don't want to denigrate ROM hacking in any way, shape, or form, because if it weren't for the dudes who can do that stuff, I wouldn't be doing this.
No, it's just I think people want, and myself, I'm included in that list of people, want the broader audience to kind of understand the difference of skill that's required. Not because any one is better. It's nothing to do with
I don't know. It's hard to say. I think it's, I mean, if you have like a really super skilled ROM hacker and makes a really sophisticated ROM hack, I wonder if the work involved is as time consuming as making a game from the ground up. I don't know. It's hard to say. I imagine it might actually be comparable. Like if you make a full disassembly of a game so that you can change anything in it at the code level. Like, I don't know. It sounds like a similar amount of effort to me.
Yeah, I think there is definitely a line that gets crossed where at this point the level of complexity of what was done is sufficiently comparable to writing it from scratch. At which point they're essentially equivalent. And then it's just kind of, did you start with a ROM or did you start with a text editor? Maybe that's the differentiation. Did you start with an existing ROM or did you start in Notepad? And then if you that answers the question of if it's a ROM hack or a homebrew.
Yeah, I think it's gonna be hard to put the genie back in the bottle. I just think like there's too many people that have the loose definition of homebrew. Like in this small scene, we know what we think homebrew means, but I don't think it's ever going to propagate sufficiently to the broader community.
Well, we'll keep fighting the good fight, right?
Games that sort of make their way out and blossom in the broader world are going to just do that because they're awesome games. You know what I mean?
Well, and with the success of things like Lizard and Micromages and you know, and the Kickstarters sort of around that, I think that's one benefit of the sort of the unfortunate sort of maybe growing, or I don't want to say unfortunate, but just the Kickstarter, the attention the Kickstarter brings to it might actually help sort of make people more aware of what the differences of these things are, assuming they care.
I love that the success of Micromages was partially propelled by a technical video about making their game 40K. I thought that was so cool. Like in that so like they didn't have to make the game 40K. They could have built the same game much more easily using a lot more space, but they chose to do this really, really challenging thing. And then that made for such a fascinating little mini documentary. And it utterly fascinated thousands and thousands of people. Like I just think that's really neat.
Yeah, and it was.
I wouldn't be able to do that with Trophy. I'll be like, well, I sprawled billions of PRG ROMs, and it was really easy. The end.
Well, we'll all give you feedback on what you should and shouldn't post on your Kickstarter. So, Derek, man, thank you so much for being on the stream tonight and spending. We're at over 2 hours of streaming now. I appreciate the time, and as always, it's a pleasure talking to you, but in person this time, sort of.
Yeah, you too. I love talking about this stuff. Thanks so much for having me on to have a big long chat about all this stuff, because I love it.
Sure. And so you're going to be at MagFest in January?
Yep, that's the plan.
Cool. It's I like it. There's a lot of convergence of people coming to MagFest, so that's going to be fun. Where can people find you on the interwebs?
Probably the place where I'm usually most active is at Gradual Games on Twitter. But I also have Gradual Games on Facebook, and I have gradualgames.com. But I'm really bad with updating those things. The only social media I really use a lot is Twitter. So I keep it all gaming, so I don't feel rage all the time.
And then you're also on Nintendo Age and NESDAV and the Discord for Nintendo Age. So people can find you there too. Yeah, thanks again. And I'll be sure to post links to all those things on the recording on YouTube and share that out so people can find you. And your games are for sale at Infinite NES Lives, right?
Yes, InfiniteNESLives.com. That's right. Both Nomolos and Elia are available there. And if you don't feel like buying the cartridge, the ROMs are actually freely available on GradualGames.com.
Yeah, and I was going to say, you download the ROMs, but you should buy the games too and help this guy because
what? We never talked about ggvm.
Oh, well.
You don't have to, though. I know it's been going for like 2 hours. It's an interesting topic. Real
quick, you want to describe what it is?
Yeah, so ggvm was my, I saw Brad Smith making Lizard and porting it to C++ and putting it on PC and releasing it on Steam, and I thought I want to put one of my games on Steam. So it sort of became I had to prove something to myself. So, and I thought, I wonder if it'd be possible to make an extremely bare bones NES emulator that would have just enough features to play my game. And I proceeded to attempt to build this thing in Java, and a few months later, I had Nomolos and Elia working in this thing, even though it's not really an NES emulator. It's NES simulator with almost none of the features of the NES, particularly the PPU. It just blasts the little 8x8 squares to the screen. It doesn't follow any of the rules of the scanline logic at all. So anytime advanced tricks are used, you have to do crazy workarounds and stuff. But the reason I wanted to bring it up is because it's funny that I went to all that effort to build that thing, and then I pulled my games from Steam because I just found it overwhelming, like I said before, and so underscoring all of that is the reason I did all that is because it was fun.
Yeah. Well, and Beau's using it for Spookatron for the few people who got the PC build. And I was testing it out because he wanted a few people to make sure it was working for them on their systems, and it worked fine, and that's pretty damn impressive that it only took you a couple months, even though I like what you said, it's an NES simulator rather than an emulator.
Yeah, and what's even more interesting is there are two projects that are sort of doing the same thing, but haven't become something that were being released to other people to use. Lizard's C++ implementation, as from what I understand from Brad Smith's description of it, has some components in it which are sort of simple imitations of certain aspects of the NES, which I imagine are probably similar to certain components of ggvm. And similarly, our friend Julius at Morphcat Games, I believe, has made something very similar to ggvm for his own game. I don't know if he's planning on releasing it or not, since he's got a ROM release now on his Kickstarter. But I was talking to him about it a lot. I just thought it was interesting that this idea was shared by several folks in the scene.
Well, and I like that. I like how before we kind of got a sense of how Brad was, I mean, to use the word you use, simulating the NES and his C++ code, it was kind of mind blowing for all of us, I think, to hear him be like, "Oh yeah, actually, I write it in C++ first, and then I kind of port it to the NES once it's working the way I want, by hand."
Yeah, that blew my mind too. Like maintaining two code bases, but I suppose the idea is that he was able to make it so that the porting was so parallel that it didn't, the context switch wasn't as intense as one might imagine it to be.
Yeah, he was describing it in a series of tweets when I asked him a question about it. But he's even gone to the level of simulating how the attributes work and changing the palettes and stuff like that. So I think it is closer in some sense to what you were talking about, related to it being sort of a simulator of the NES that runs Lizard. But then at the same point, he also ported it to DOS in such a way that it fits on a floppy.
I love that he did that. That was so cool that he did that. I was really excited about that, and I ran it in because I have the game on itch.io. I ran it in my DOS box, and yeah, it's cool because I'm quite nostalgic for DOS as well as he was. Not nostalgic enough to truly delve back in and actually write DOS code. I'm able to get the same jollies from NES and Pico 8 and so on, but it was really cool to see him do that.
Yeah. So yeah, no, that was pretty neat, and he was determined that it was going to fit on one floppy, and he did it. So that was pretty cool. But awesome. No, thanks again, and really appreciate it, and look forward to seeing you at MagFest, and of course talking to you online, and thank you again, and have an awesome night.
You too. Thanks, Mike. Thanks everybody on the stream.
Yep.
Yeah.